repository. Very, very important topic, very useful topic as well. Because that is the heart behind the QTP. Without that, our mind behind QTP. Without that, QTP doesn't work. All the advanced concept of QTP revolves around that object repository. So what is first object repository? Object repository is nothing but storage place. What it stores? It stores the recognition properties of an object. So QTP stores the recognition properties of an object into the repository. Before I proceed, I'll just quickly go type it whatever we have completed. Just a second. Now, what I'm trying to say is now, just for an understanding purpose, first we have seen objects by. The purpose of objects by is to identify how QTP identified the object, properties, and method that can be used for that object. Second, you will come to know there are three types of things you will come to know. One is standard, another is non-standard. Is my voice screen is visible to you all? Then non-recognition objects. Please raise your hand if my voice and screen is visible to you all. Yep, thank you. Now this is the main purpose of objects by. Then we moved on to object identification. In object identification, what we have seen is how to know the standard classes, how to convert non-standard class to standard class for Windows add, standard Windows add. This is what we have seen now. I hope you remember this. So anyway, you will get the detailed course material at the later path. Now what we are going to move is repository. So repository is a storage place. So repository, what is repository? Repository is a storage place, and this storage place, all the objects on which QTP performs action are stored over here. Objects are stored along with its recognition properties. Recognition properties is the nomenclature I use for you to understand. From the perspective of QTP, you are supposed to use the word called description properties. This is the nomenclature you are supposed to use. Right? So this is what repository is, main purpose of the repository. Now I go back here. I'll now moving on inside the repository now. Resources, where the repository is available. Resources. Under resources, you can see now there are two things. One is called object repository, another is called object repository manager. Object repository is generally termed as a local repository. Every action will have its own repository by default, that you cannot remove it, and that repository is called object repository, is called local repository. And I can also have a facility to store all the objects into a separate location that is called shared repository. All users can use that repository into their script. That is called shared repository. Shared repository will be used with an extension called .tsr file. Object repository, local repository is stored along with the extension called object repository.bdb file. BDB file. Object repository.bdb file. We'll come to that in the actual, once we record some of the scripts, we'll exactly show you how it is stored. So there is no difference in the whether it is you are using a shared repository or a local repository. QTP doesn't have any difference approach for in managing that repository. So now I am going on to the object repository. In this object repository now, by default, if you see, I have action 1 in my screen. Left hand side you can see action 1. For this action 1, I have not added any objects. You can see now this object repository window is for that action 1. And I am going to add an object here in this to this screen. Which object I am going to add? I am trying to add a QTP object. I'll try to add a QTP object to that screen. Sorry, calculator object. Is it calculator is visible? Yes. So I'm trying to now deal with calculator for this screen now. I want to add an object. Add objects. I'm just selecting the object in the menu. Add object to local. So by clicking onto this, I am now going to add this button 1. This is what we were using before. Using the spy window, I am going to select button 1 and that button 1 is added now to the script. In this button 1, now you can see now the way the button 1 is recognized. So button 1 is recognized with description properties, window ID, native class. He is not used, you might have seen in the spy, lot of properties are shown to you. All those properties are not used to recognize this button. What he has used is window ID and native class. This is the two properties he has used to recognize this button. If the same calculator, if you take, the calculator is also an object that is been recognized, added to the repository. In calculator, you are able to see now 4 properties are used to recognize an object. Right? Here button you can see 2 properties. For calculator you are able to see now 4 properties. When you are dealing with this applications, don't try to find a meaning for each and every property. So for time being, until you get a comfort level, accept it as it is. That means don't try to find a meaning to what this regular expression window title means, what this regular expression window class means, what is his own window, what is his child window, what is this window ID, who assigns the value for window ID, native class. All this let us not worry about. What you need to do is, our first understanding is button is recognized with 2 properties. Calculator is recognized with 4 properties. Now the next question comes is, who tells QTP that button has to be recognized with these 2 properties, calculator has to be recognized with these 4 properties? Who tells QTP this? That is our first question. Now I add one more object. That object may be an edit box. This edit box. So I add this object. So that is WinEdit. Now the edit box is recognized with a single edit, single property, native class. I'll try to add an object from the flight reservation. I'll try to add the object. Say this name. We know the name is also an edit box. In this name, I am trying to add this object to the repository. So here the window is flight reservation. Object is WinEdit name. Now for this name, QTP has used 2 properties. For window, for calculator is also a window, flight reservation is also a window. For both, you notice now the same 4 properties are used to recognize. So here is also 4, calculator is also 4. Whereas this edit is native class alone. Here the name, you are having 2 properties. So somebody tells QTP, this is the way you need to manage the object. So who controls this and how it has been done? This is again done by the object identification. So object identification is the guy who controls. I am going to object identification now. This guy who controls how the object has to be recognized. Let us now take this button. Button, this is, you have now the right hand side, you have mandatory properties, you have assistive properties, you have ordinal identifier. These are all the ways I recognize the object. What is mandatory, what is assistive, what is ordinal, we'll come to that little later. Now what we are trying to understand is what made QTP to use these 2 objects. These 2 objects are made because the mandatory properties is set with native class and window ID. That is the reason QTP recognizes that object using these 2 properties. Now I'll go to the window object. Let us see how this window object is configured. So this is the window object. In this window object, you can see again the mandatory properties. The 4 properties are set. Because these 4 properties are set, he is now recognizing with the 4 properties. Then, right, if you have any doubt, please let me know. Raise your hand. And you can send me a mail as well. Keep collecting all your doubts, collate all the doubts. Send me a mail, I'll reply back also. Not an issue. Now, window is having set with 4 properties. So I recognize with 4 properties. Now next is WinEdit. If I go to WinEdit, WinEdit is recognized with the 2 properties, but you notice now one object is recognized with native class alone, another object is recognized with both the properties.